In the 1970s, Southern California, with its vast freeways and large population, became home to many infamous serial killers. Among them, Randy Kraft, the scorecard killer, William Bonin, the freeway killer, the killer cousins Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Bono, the highly published Hillside Stranglers, whose 10 murders terrorized the residents of Los Angeles. In 1979, as the decade was drawing to a close, a pair of brutal killers would once again stalk the streets and highways of Los Angeles. Unlike Bianchi and Bono, who would receive instant notoriety upon capture, these killers were oblique, targeting mostly hitchhikers and disposing of their victims' remains in the San Gabriel Mountains. Detectives would not realize the full extent of their crimes until after they were captured. Shirley Lynette Ledford was waiting outside of a gas station. It was Halloween night and she had recently attended a party. As she was waiting, she was approached by 2 men in a van offering her a ride. 16, she worked part-time at a restaurant and recognized the driver. She agreed. As soon as she was inside, they offered her marijuana, which she declined. They continued driving until coming upon a deserted street. Then suddenly the passenger produced a knife and threatened her. He then bound her hands and feet before gagging her. The killers made an audio tape of the horrific events that were to occur that night, before strangling her with a coat hanger and disposing of her body in the front lawn of a residential area. It would mark the end of a 4-month-long murder spree that would result in the death of 5 teenage girls. Shortly after the murder of Shirley Lynette Ledford, Paul Dalton walked into the Los Angeles Police Department. He had recently ran into an old friend from prison, Roy Norris. During a conversation, Norris had described in detail the murder of 4 teenage girls. Norris had an accomplice to these murders, a man by the name of Lawrence Bittaker. Dalton was skeptical of the story that Norris had told him until the body of Shirley Lynette Ledford had been found and her injuries matched those described by Norris to previous victims. Detective Paul Bynum did not know of what to make of the story that he was hearing. Dalton was a former convict who did not have any corroborating evidence. That is, until Dalton described how the 2 killers had been driving around in a silver van. A month previous, there had been a case where Shirley Sanders, an Oregon resident who was visiting her father in Manhattan Beach, had been abducted by 2 men in a silver van. She had managed to escape, but had been unable to identify her attackers. An officer went to visit Shirley Sanders in Oregon. They brought with them photographs to see if she could make an identification. She identified Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris as her attackers. Based on the story of Paul Dalton and the identification of Shirley Sanders, the 2 men were put under surveillance. The men were not under surveillance long before Roy Norris was observed selling marijuana and promptly arrested. The same day they arrested Lawrence Bittaker. It would be after their arrest that the true horror of their crimes would come to light. Lawrence Sigmund Bittaker was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on September 27, 1940. His biological parents, not wanting children, decided to put him in an orphanage. He was adopted by George Bittaker and his wife. Due to George Bittaker's work in aircraft factories, the family frequently moved, first from Pennsylvania to Florida, then to Ohio, before settling in Southern California. Despite being a very intelligent child, having scored 138 on an IQ test, he was a poor student who was frequently in trouble for shoplifting. He described his crimes as a possible cry for attention, claiming that his parents did not show him enough love. At the age of 17, he dropped out of high school. He was quickly arrested for hit and run, auto theft, and evading arrest, sent to the California Youth Authority until the age of 19. Upon his release, he was arrested days later by the FBI in Louisiana for violating the Interstate Motor Vehicle Theft Act. He was sentenced to 18 months to be served in a Federal Reformatory in Oklahoma. Due to his behavior, he was transferred to a medical center in Springfield, Missouri, where after serving 2/3 of his sentence, he was released. In 1960, Bittaker would find himself in trouble again, this time for robbery. He was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the state penitentiary. He underwent a psychiatric examination. It was determined that he had considerable concealed hostility and was manipulative. The examination also found that despite his high intelligence, he was paranoid and borderline psychotic. He was evaluated again in 1962. The psychiatrist deemed him to have poor control of impulsive behavior. In 1963, he was granted early parole, having only served 1/6 of his maximum sentence. After his release, Bittaker continued to find himself in prison for various offenses. In 1974, he was arrested for attempted murder after stabbing a supermarket employee during a shoplifting attempt. Before his trial, he was examined by Dr. Robert Markman, who determined that Bittaker was a classic sociopath, that he was incapable of playing by the rules, that he was unable to learn from experience, and that he would continue to challenge the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Dr. Markman also warned he was likely to escalate his criminal behavior, moving on to more severe crimes. Bittaker was to largely confirm the evaluation, boasting to a cellmate that once released he was going to be bigger than Manson. He was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon. While serving his sentence at the California's men's colony, he would meet Roy Norris. Roy Lewis Norris was born February 5, 1948. His father was employed as a scrapyard worker, and his mother was a housewife. His parents married to avoid the shame of an illegitimate child. He had an unstable childhood, moving between his natural parents and foster homes. When he was 16, a profound event was to occur in his life. He had been staying with his natural parents when he decided to visit the home of a female relative. The woman became enraged and forced him to leave the house for making sexually inappropriate comments towards her. She informed his father, who threatened to beat him. To avoid the wrath of his father, he stole his father's car, then drove to the Rocky Mountains, where he attempted suicide by injecting air into an artery. The suicide attempt failed. He was discovered by the police and returned to his parents' residence. There, his parents informed him and his younger sister that they were unwanted and that they planned on a divorce when both children reached adolescence. A year later, he dropped out of high school and joined the Navy. He was stationed in San Diego as a naval electrician. In 1969, he was sent to Vietnam. He was stationed there for 4 months and did not see combat. While in Vietnam, he began using drugs, first marijuana and then heroin. Upon his return from Vietnam, he began a series of attacks on women. In November 1969, he was arrested for rape, assault, and attempt to commit rape, after forcing his way into a taxi and attacking the female driver. While out on bail in February 1970, after failing to convince a woman to let him into her home, he attempted to break in. The police arrived before he could harm the woman. In May of 1970, he attacked a female student on the campus of San Diego State University. He struck the woman over the head with a rock. When she fell to the ground, he began to hit her head against the sidewalk. Remarkably, the woman survived the attack. Norris underwent a psychiatric examination that determined he had severe schizoid personality disorder. As a result of the diagnosis, he was sentenced to 5 years at the Atascadero State Hospital. He was released in 1975. While riding his motorcycle in Redondo Beach, Norris saw a 27-year-old woman walking home. She declined when he offered her a ride. He then parked the motorcycle and grabbed the woman by the scarf. He forced her into some bushes where he raped her. The woman reported the rape to the police. A month later, while riding his motorcycle, he was recognized by the woman that he had raped. She reported his license plate to the police. He was arrested for the rape and convicted. In 1977, Bittaker and Norris first met each other.